My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a forward observer and a military police officer. I've spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to the DTD Podcast. This week, John Hurth from the TYR Group. Now, that's a professional tactical training and consulting company that also offers a small range of products. They provide specialized training and consultation services to a broad spectrum of audiences. We're going to get into it tonight, everything that they teach, but we're also going to talk about his military career. We're going to talk about tracking a human being, and we'll get into a lot more. So, John, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, DJ. Thanks.
Yeah, man. I'm so glad you're here. We have a lot to talk about tonight. So I want to talk, like I said, about your military career. I want to talk about TYR Group, and I want to talk about the books that you've written and the publications that you've done. But let's start with your military career. Now, when we were talking earlier before the show, we figured out that we were at the same unit at the same time. We kind of crisscrossed each other and never saw each other, which was pretty amazing to me. And it says kind of what a small world this really is. Sure. We were both in the 25th at the same time, and actually at the same 227. I think I was over in 25 as a forward observer as you were coming back with 227. And then right as you PCS'd out, I went over to 227. So I loved being in the 25th. I think it's one of my favorite units in the whole Army. I think it's probably the best unit in the whole Army. And everyone I talk to seems to love their time that they did. Feelings about it with you?
I have to say the same thing. I mean, you know, I came there from the 82nd, and you know, it was kind of like you get there and you're kind of like, oh, you're in a leg unit and everything like that. But first time out, man, we were road marching from the Cahoocoo's all the way back to Schofield Barracks. So I mean, that was quite a way to break a new guy in, and but I mean, I have nothing bad to ever say. I have nothing bad to say about any of my time over in Hawaii. I thought it was great. I thought the unit was awesome. It was NCO driven. You know, the officers stayed out of our way, and frickin' everything was decentralized. And, you know, it was great. I had a great time there. Got to go to a lot of schools.
Yeah.
You know,
that was great about Hawaii.
And I'll tell you what, you know, even though they didn't have the money like the 82nd had, it forced you to kind of like work outside of your comfort zone, you know, to do things a little bit differently because of the terrain over there, the weather conditions. You know, sometimes the equipment wasn't the greatest, so you had to use a lot of field craft and live off the ground, you know, live off the land a little bit. I mean, you could do that. You could, you know, there's plenty of stuff out there in the jungle you could eat. So, yeah, I thought it was great. You know, and of course, you know, I went through, you know, their RIP program to go over to Ranger School, and I thought that was the best program that that the Army had. Well, to get guys prepared to go.
And I think at that time when you went over there, they were rated as the best RIP course in the whole Army over at East Range, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I went to air assault school out there, and that just the whole environment, the training environment, I felt about the 25th that they really wanted to teach people everything that they possibly could. Like like you said, just the number of schools that were offered and how they got their people taken care of. That's what I really liked about it. Now, did they have the dog when you were at 227? Did the commander have the dog?
127 had the dog.
They had the dog. Okay.
Yeah, they had the dog.
I saw the dog briefly, just like once or twice while I was over there. There wasn't very much. Now, I do remember that we did when we did those division runs for Aloha Friday. I don't know if you were there at the time. Do you remember the Golden Dragons that were, I think they were the next barracks over when someone painted the dragon pink? And
I think that was what was that, Sequad, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. But the commander, the division commander runs by and there's a pink dragon that someone painted the night before the division run. He was not a happy man the next day. So, being over there and talking about the field craft and stuff, did you have that when you were at the 82nd before you were in the military? Were you always someone that kind of liked to be out in the field, kind of figure out how to survive, live off the land, and move around, or was that something that kind of grew in you as you went through the military?
Uh, well, I'll be honest. I mean, from the time I was 4 years old, I wanted to be a soldier. That's all I ever wanted to do. And so, growing up, I liked to mess around in the woods, and then when I was 17, I joined the military. Um, and how I got into a lot of I joined the army, went into the infantry. That's what I started out my career as, and went over to Europe. I was stationed in mines with 8th ID over there. Uh, had some great NCOs, man. I mean, a lot of them, Vietnam generation, so a lot of those guys had a lot of things that they could pass on. Um, and unfortunately, I think a lot of those skill sets kind of left the military. I mean, as a guy who was taught it, you can only pass that knowledge on to so many people. Just your sphere of response, sphere of control. Uh, but those guys were, instrumental in mentoring me anyway. And I applied most of everything they ever taught me. So, but yeah, I've always been into field craft. I've always been, kind of at home in the woods. Still am. I still go out there and mess around. So.
Well, in talking about that, because you and I spoke about the Vietnam era thing for a little while earlier, and do you think that we have, in a sense, because this will get to a question that I have for you later on, but do you think, in a sense, that we've kind of lost that basic function? We're so technology driven. We're so into the future in everything that you're out in the field. I mean, if you
Yeah.
look, and it's been so long since I've been in, but SINGARs and radios and how they changed and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. Do you think we've lost kind of that basic instinct out in the field, the tracking abilities? Because we talked, and the last group was the Vietnam trackers.
Yeah.
Do you think we've lost that ability?
Oh yeah. I mean, on so many different levels. I mean, I see it with just the soldiers that I teach. And I've gotten a chance to teach guys from all the different services, and so it's not something that's service specific. It's happening across the military, overall. I mean, just basic things like camouflage and concealment. Attention to detail to indicators out there in the woods. It's just land navigation skills. I get E7s who come to my land nav class just so they can learn land nav because they don't do it. So yeah, I mean I think it's all that stuff that you know uh, when you were in the military they had it back then too. I mean, I think that was when it kind of that was when things started to die out.
I
You
think
know,
so. I think that's the shifting
uh,
point.
you know they had a they had a certain type of type of method of training back then that's kind of just been pushed away. And yeah, guys are you they're stuck on their gadgets, they're stuck on their GPSs, they're stuck on all that equipment. I mean, uh, guys going out in the woods without night vision, I mean, that's intimidating to some of those guys, you know. But in my classes, we don't use it. We don't use night vision. We go out there and we do it old school. And you start to learn about the shadows. You looked at, you learn how to differentiate the different types of, the different obstacles and the terrain and everything else based upon the shadows, and the way the color is, and you negotiate it without nods. So, because I mean, if your stuff is, you should never put your life in the hands of something that's battery operated.
True.
And so at least it's something that you can utilize. It's a force multiplier. But the thing is what if it goes down? And what do you do then? You know? So that's kind of my philosophy anyway.
Do you think that there is a use for that? You kind of said that just now, but do you think there's a place for that where we can kind of meld the two together, that old style, the new
Oh,
style?
most definitely. Yeah, most definitely. I mean, the thing is technology is going to be here. If it can enhance, your operations and everything else, I mean, that's great. That's wonderful. The problem is that stuff breaks. And what do you do, when that stuff breaks? You've got to have something. You got to have your PACE plan, right? Your primary, alternate, contingency, emergency plan. And so if that stuff busts on you, or doesn't work, or it gets spoofed, that's the thing that's the funny thing that happens at the training centers, right? They'll spoof a training unit who's coming there to, to play at JRTC or NTC, but they'll spoof those guys' GPSs and they'll never make it to an objective. And that's real life, for a near peer threat.
So, for people that are listening that might not understand what you're talking about, talk to them about spoofing and what they're doing to their actual technology systems.
Yeah, they'll just basically they're hacking their GPSs so that way it basically puts them in another area than the area they actually want to go to. And if you don't, if you're not used to, well, just utilizing a compass and map and compass, and protractor, and using that as your main method of traversing the terrain, and you're just using GPS all the time, well, you're not gonna be at the right place where you're supposed to be. So, I'm kind of one of those guys where I love GPSs, but I always use a map and compass. And if I haven't, want to try to confirm where I'm at, then I'll use the GPS. But other than that, I go off. I'm old school. I just go off of a map and compass. That's it. You know, Follow along the way. Set in different intermediate objectives along the way, so you meet those intermediate objectives and you know exactly where you're at all times. Having a handrail off to the left and right, keeping you in a corridor. So
So, let's talk about your career a little bit because it's a pretty interesting career. About where you've been and kind of what you've done. You haven't really taken a conventional route. You have done a couple of conventional things, like you said. You were a leg over in Hawaii. You were with the 82nd. So you've
mhm.
done your time in Big Army, but you were also part of First Special Forces. But the interesting part of that to me was when we talk about it, you did a lot of different things in Special Forces. You were a weapons sergeant, assistant operations and intelligence sergeant, operations sergeant. So you went a whole bunch of different routes. And then you took those skills and put them into other things that you did, whether that be, and we'll talk about this a little later, being a contractor or working at JRTC or working at Huachuca. In doing those mission plans and kind of setting up these scenarios for people. So, if you can, I want to talk about first your steps from going from Big Army into Special Forces, kind of the transition that it happened, what pushed you in that direction, and then how was that transition for you? Was it a very easy one? Was it did it make a lot more sense than Big Army? Because a lot of people say that Big Army is kind of a confusing the way it does things. Was it a lot more streamlined for you? But let's start in just what made you decide I'm leaving this and I'm going to start moving up through into special operations.
Well, I mean, that was one of my goals. From even when I was a private, that I was eventually going to go down that road. Uh, I think I think the big thing for me was the Army started changing. You know, during the Clinton administration, and then I was already a senior guy in the 82nd. My second tour when I came back from Hawaii, and I told myself I was going to give that one place. I'm going to give the 82nd 1 year, and I did that 1 year from the day, and then I went SF. So, but I mean, it's just the army was changing, and here's the other thing too. I knew this. I knew uh, when I made E7, I was going to be put in more of an administrative role. E7, E8, E9. In SF, you can be still on the ground for a lot longer. So it was like a no brainer. And besides, I like deploying. I like different cultures, different people. I love teaching people things. And that was, and the big thing is just going over there and working with other cultures, other people, and trying to help them out. So that was to me, that was a no brainer. And it was like I said, it was like, that was something I always wanted to do. And uh, I wouldn't say it was, it wasn't a big change. Uh, it just mean it for me compared to the regular army, the gloves were, the handcuffs were off me. So I had
Right.
a lot more leeway into, and a lot more responsibility as an SF guy than in the conventional army. Way more, because you're working at a strategic level. Every time you go somewhere, you might be the only U.S. representation in a country, and so, or you're working with the consulate, you're working with ambassadors, high, 4-star generals, the whole 9 yards. And of course, you're working with some guy, in his country, and he may not even have a grade school education. And so, you understanding the culture, understanding the people, and working in those different levels is challenging sometimes. But I loved it. I thought it was great. You know.
When you say that you were a senior guy already, I want to bring up a point, and we've kind of talked how the Army has changed, but here's another way in that it's changed. Before, when you were in order to go to Special Forces, to go to Delta, to go to these specialized units, they wanted more senior people, people that
Yep.
had their feet underneath them, they knew what they were doing. And now that there's a lot of programs, because we've been at war for 20 plus years, there's
Right.
all these programs where you can go 18 X-ray, go
Yep.
right into the pipeline. It just takes a little longer as you go through the pipeline, but you've got
Yeah, I'm
younger
not.
soldiers. Okay,
I'm not a. But
okay,
no, see,
so let's talk about it, because it seems like that's a hot button. Because I didn't even get through really the question, but I think you knew where I was headed with it. Was
yeah, I know where you're going. To me, look, here's the thing. I get it. Uh, every branch, every component has a man. They have to man slots. Okay, and SF was put under a lot of demand under OEF, and OIF. But the thing is you cannot take a guy off the street through the 18 X-ray program and develop a leader. You can't do that. That he doesn't have any experience, and he has no way of really understanding what the conventional army does. And so when you have to work with the conventional army, you don't understand from their point of view because you never came from there. So it's a different culture in and of itself, right?
okay,
So to me, the best thing is to do is to basically recruit, senior NCOs that are, maybe looking at penning on E6 or E6, looking at E7, but guys who've been around the block a little bit, even some of the E4s, you get them into SF, and it's like you're setting them up kind of for failure in the sense that you're supposed to be working at like a battalion level. When you're advising your counterpart, you're at a battalion level. You're not a squad leader. You're not a team leader. You're interacting with captains and majors and colonels and things of that nature. You know, yeah, you're training the little nugs on the ground, but you're also dealing with their officers, and some of them have even gone to the United States and worked, and gone through schooling here in the United States. So if you don't talk their talk, you're not going to have any rapport with those people.
okay. So let me pose this question to you then, because it's an interesting take on that. Because I've talked to a lot of different people. A lot of different people have different opinions on this. Let me
Sure.
pose this question to you. A lot of people would say, when you go to basic training and you get these guys that have never shot a rifle before, and they say, well,
Right.
we can teach them because they have no bad habits yet.
Right.
I think people would argue that point, that if we start this pipeline at the beginning, we have no bad habits. We haven't developed any big army habits. And that might help streamline that into knowing exactly what they're doing. I would like your answer back to that of what you think of something like that.
Yeah, I don't agree with it. Look, it's not the first time the U.S. Army had the X-ray program.
Right.
They had it even when I came in, right in the '80s. They had it then, and it just, you know, look. One of my old team sergeants was an 18 X-ray that grew up through SF, and he always told me. He said, you know, he had wished he had gone in the regular Army because there was a lot of things he didn't get. You know, I mean, look, man, as an East, you know, as an E5, I was doing NCOERs for my team leaders. You know what I'm saying? Well, in SF, sometimes those guys don't do an NCOER until they're an E8. You know, whereas if you're a platoon sergeant, you're doing it for all your squad leaders. You're making
Right.
sure your squad leaders are doing it for your team leaders. You know, so I mean, it's a, you know, in that respect, by the time you go to SF as a, you know, as a guy who's been an NCO for a while, you understand leadership, you understand culture, you understand, you know, how soldiers react to things, and you know, sometimes you have to motivate them in different ways based upon just, you know, what you're perceiving from them, you know, and it's no different when you go overseas. It's the same thing. You have cultural barriers, but I'm still there. Those people are still human beings, and you're, you know, in a leadership position, and so you know, it's no different. But I've seen guys that were X-rays, and then, you know, we deploy in a fucking combat theater, you know, and then what happens is these guys are put in with an indigenous company, and they don't know how to handle them. They don't
Okay.
have the skill set, you know.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute because I think that's pretty interesting because you and I talked about some of the other stuff that you did, and we talked about you being part of ASOs. Now, let's talk about that because in that, you did a lot of intelligence gathering, living within those cultures and stuff. So, talk about as much as you possibly can about what that means when you bring in that 18X ray compared to someone that's been before, because I'm sure you've seen it in both directions by
Mm-hmm.
being a senior guy, but also
Yeah.
seeing that. So it kind of explain the difference of what they're seeing through their eyes and what the difference is.
Okay, so what are you talking about? You talk about the 18 X-rays and how they're.
Right. So when you get there, like you were talking about the 18 X-ray, so you get over there, you're indigenous. They're with people that they've never worked with before. They're not
Yeah.
quite sure how to work compared to a senior guy.
Okay, so yeah, so let me just kind of throw this out there.
Okay.
So what happens with the younger guys that aren't, you know, that haven't gone through, haven't been in the military for a long time, right? Is that they develop a lot of bad habits because they want to be cool guys. You know what I'm saying? And so they start doing things that uh, they learn bad habits early off, because in SF we're not held to the same standards as like the rest of the Army. I mean, you know, we're a little bit more relaxed. You know, we call each other by our first name, and, you know, hands in the pockets, and sometimes we're out of uniform and all that other stuff. The problem is that the thing is the older guys typically understand their operational environment. So if you're, you know, around senior officers, conventional guys, or, you know, your counterparts, you're gonna do things differently, you know. Whereas like the X-ray guys, you know, they tend to, you know, try to be the cool guy on the block, you know, and because it's the image, right?
Right.
And unfortunately, if you don't have some real strong senior guys to really, you know, mentor those guys early on, then a lot of times those guys go sideways. You know, I can, from my personal experience, the guys that got, you know, that got whacked over in Afghanistan were the X-rays, and they just lacked experience. You know, so, and it's a sad thing, you know, because they're Americans out there to do some, you know, do our bidding. You know what I'm saying? And but they just lack experience.
In saying that, with you talking about being over there, with you seeing the people that went down, is there a way that the military can continue a program like this, but expand on it in ways that you might not see those things? Is there a way to lengthen it out, to send them to other maybe schools that would teach them kind of decorum and things like that that they might not be picking up if they never worked conventional
Not
army?
really, not really, because I mean, really, it's just it's peer pressure on the team.
Hmm.
The seniors on the team sergeant, keeping those guys in line, you know, making sure that they're doing the right thing. A lot of guys, man, they go a little bit crazy when they first get there because they're not used to having that much independence, and and you got to have people who can think independently and kind of see the situation and you know take initiative. And if you don't have guys that are like that, they're gonna get into trouble. You know,
Switching
especially
gear.
when it comes to their off time and drinking.
Absolutely, absolutely. But and I've heard people say that. I think that might be a problem all around.
Yeah,
I think you see it in every kind of job where there's that hero or kind of cool guy status, like you said,
yeah,
whether that be first responders, law enforcement, military. You get these guys that they experience this for the first time. I know that when I was in the military and stuff, and you're in the barracks and and there's drinking going on and all that
yeah.
kind of stuff, and you've never been around it, your eyes are kind of opened up to the world. I think that is a problem all around. But switching gears and talking about this ASO and things that you were doing with OEF and OIF, can we talk a little bit about that? Because I hadn't really ever heard about that stuff until you started talking to me about it. I had heard
Well,
ideas of
so
it, but when you
yeah.
explained it, it was something completely different to me.
Well, I mean, you do some of the same things like we were talking about. Handling guys, their assets and things like that. But I mean, you don't have a lot of times, you have Americans who are not fitting into that country, and how are they supposed to get information? How are they supposed to operate in denied area? You know, and so you got to have guys who are willing to work with you and to go out there and do it because they have access and placement. You know, you can't go there; they can though. And they can be your eyes and ears. So it's no different than anybody that has some sort of source that's providing them information or things like that. But I mean, there's other things those guys do too. It's just I don't want to talk about it obviously on here, um,
Right, and I don't want to get
but
missions.
it's
I guess not
integral,
mission
especially
or
for unconventional warfare, where you're sitting there and you are in denied area. You're working with a resistance element. You know what I'm saying? And
mhm.
so everything is clandestine or covert, right? And so you've got to have a network of people who can do those tasks, even sabotage, subversion, things like that. So yeah, it's a pretty important skill. It's not the cool commando stuff that everybody thinks. You know what I'm saying? Where you got ski masks on and stuff like that, breaking down and kicking in doors. It's a different type of cool thing. I always guys would sit there and say, well, um, SF didn't go get Bin Laden. I was like, yeah, but that wasn't our job. That wasn't our job. SEAL Team 6 and the things that they do, right, are completely different from what we do. You know, uh, we would have probably done it a lot differently, you know, because we'd have sources on the ground. We'd work those sources. We'd get somebody that may, clandestinely move us into that area. You know, maybe we wouldn't have flown in on helicopters. Maybe we would have taken them out some other way. You know, maybe there would be, deniability in there or whatever. It could, there we could have done it several different ways, but it wasn't our. That's not our job. The SEALs were the element that did that, and they did it the way that they are taught to do things. You know, every service is different. Everybody has their own capabilities. They all have different things to bring to the table. It's not like one's better than the other. It's just like, what is the effect you want? You know, and that's what you look for.
I've talked to a lot of guys about being in Afghanistan. Of course, you were over there for a while. And with all of everything that's going on with Afghanistan, with President Biden saying that we're going to pull out and essentially create a vacuum, I've asked a lot of people that have come on the show, what are your thoughts on that? Because the way I feel about it, and I've said it a couple times on the show, is when you create that vacuum that we've built this country up and we have all these teammates and we've tried to do, I would think you would agree, nation building over there, and then you pull out all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a collapse? What do you see happening?
What do I see? What I see happening there?
Yeah. Yes.
It's going to collapse. It's going to collapse no matter what. I mean, we were hamsters, you know, spinning our wheels over there. I mean, it was, you know, you can't fix a problem in Afghanistan until you fix the problem in Pakistan. You know, there's a lot of things going on in that country, and you know, Pakistan had their fingers in a lot of stuff, and we were in there messing things up for them. You know, and everybody knows it. You know, those guys were not our friends. They were not our allies. You know, they were part of the enemy. So, you know, you can't. It's just like Vietnam, right? You can't have a safe haven across a border, right? Like, you know, the NVA going over into Laos and Cambodia, right? And then, you know, we just stop at that border. Well, that's what you had, the same thing going on over in Pakistan. You know, and then they had an exclusion zone that so you couldn't get too close to the doggone border. You know, I mean, I was over there in 2004 and 2005, and I even saw within a couple of months, I was like, the way things are going, nothing was gonna get fixed over there. Nothing was gonna get fixed. You know, it's not because of the people on the ground. The guys on the ground who are making things happen, you know, at the tactical level, they're taking the fight to the enemy. But you know, those guys up above who are making all the decisions, they're the ones who are screwing things up. You know, whether it be State Department or the generals up above. You know, they don't have any they don't have any situational awareness on the ground, and to fight any kind of insurgency, it has to be decentralized. And they didn't want, you know, decentralization. I mean, for the SF guys, we had it decentralized. You know, but the conventional army didn't have that. You know, and then later on the SF guys didn't either. As soon as NATO came in there, you know, it kind of changed everything up. So, but I mean, you can't, if you don't understand an insurgency, how are you going to fight it? If you don't understand their mechanisms, you know, what does their underground look like? What does their auxiliary look like? You know, their guerrilla force, are they in a mature state, or are they in an immature state? You know, where, you know, the guerrilla, the auxiliary, and the underground are all doing the same thing because they don't have anybody. You know, I mean, even when I got up there, the group that was handling the area that we were working in, even though they're SF guys, man, they had no clue how that insurgency was in our area. You know, in our area, we had three different groups working in that area. But if you talk to the ODA that was there before us, it was just bad guys here, bad guys there, bad guys there. Yeah, there were names associated with them, but you didn't really know what were their boundaries. You know, who was in charge of what? Did they ever work with each other? If they didn't work with each other, was there animosity between, you know, some of those groups? And could you use that animosity to your own benefit? You know what I'm saying? They didn't quite understand that. And I don't know what happened after I left because, you know, I know when we were there, we exploited quite a bit.
And speaking from an intelligence standpoint, like you were just talking about, knowing the ground, is there really ever a way? Because I don't know that there is. When you have so many splinter groups, fractions, fractures in it, is
Yeah.
there any real way to have true intelligence on the ground? Because everybody doesn't like everybody. And is there ever a way to build a true intelligence database?
You know what? You're constantly testing. You're testing everything, you know, the people that are coming in, you're bouncing stuff off, trying to get, information that will corroborate one another. But over there, there's so much problems because these guys, they're all stabbing each other in the back. They're all in survival mode, whether it be, power for families or tribal problems or whatever. I mean, there's always going to be that. And so, you have to kind of figure out, okay, well, what's this guy's angle? If a guy's coming, it's like, I know, you said you worked, some undercover stuff, working with guys and stuff like that. Why is he coming to you and telling you what he's telling you? You know what I'm saying? What is he going to get out of this?
There's definitely motive behind it.
Yeah, there's a motive, right? And so you're constantly asking yourself, okay, what does this guy want? He wants something. I've only met one guy that I worked with who legitimately cared about his country because he saw Afghanistan was going to be in perpetual civil war forever with the way the tribal system was. But he was one guy that that he was the golden nugget that brought a lot of good stuff to us. But
When
it
he
took almost it took almost a whole rotation before I found that guy. But you're always hunting.
when you talk about that though, when you say that there was one guy that had true intentions,
Yeah.
it's hard for me to believe that even he had true intentions. Does that make any
Well,
sense?
yeah. Well, no. Look, he wanted safety and security because he was already at target. He was already at target by the insurgents. He couldn't go home. So if he could clean up that area, right, to where it was safe for him to go home and see his family and be with his family and not have people trying to kill him, that was good for him.
I,
And
I,
that was,
I yeah, I can see that from that point of view. But you always have to, I think, and you're aware of this, you always kind of have to temper that because there's always
sure.
that real under the surface right there motive
Yeah.
where they say, I'm all for this and I'm all for that. Well, why
Yeah.
are you all for this and why are you all for that?
Yeah. You know what, though? This guy didn't really, that was my assessment.
Hmm.
That's not what he told me.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? That was my assessment, not what he, basically told me.
Right.
He was kind of like, he wanted to get the look. They all know who the bad guys are. It's no different than a neighborhood, right? You got the troublemakers in the neighborhood.
Right.
You know, it, you telling me that these guys that feel like they're being intimidated by the gang leaders and everything else, right? They know who those guys are. They know what they're doing. You know, it's the same thing over with insurgents. I mean, you're just dealing with different criminals. You know.
Let's talk about when you're over at Huachuca and you're doing the combat tracker course. I want to talk about the combat tracker course, and then I want to talk about something that you brought up to me about the IED kind of operations and the intelligence they built around that. But first, let's talk about going to the combat tracker course, what it is, how it works, and how maybe it doesn't work now because of
Yeah.
things that have happened.
Well, it was basically it was a contract. Uh, it was run by it was paid for by the Joint IED Defeat Organization, and so they had a certain time frame. I don't know if it was 3 to 5 years or something that they were going to pay for this thing. It was basically a proof of concept, to basically use this type of skill set overseas to basically uh, track individuals by the signs that they left on the ground. Okay, so it's kind of like forensics. The way I talk about it, it's like combat forensics, right? So if you're looking down at the ground and you're seeing boot prints, you're basically like, okay, well, we have so many enemy, or maybe it was a friendly patrol that came through that area. I mean, depending on the type of footwear, are they moving at a high rate of speed? Are they walking? Is somebody limping? Is there blood sign? Because somebody was shot. Uh, you're basically doing this, trying to figure out what the enemy's doing, where they're going, and what potentially they're going to be doing, or where they're going, and what potentially they can do to you also, right? And so it's dangerous, um, because you're just not following footprints or a sign. You're following people who can, basically button hook around and ambush you. So I mean, you have to be aware, of everything going on around you, because you're not choosing the route you're taking. Somebody else is choosing that route for you. But the course was 2 weeks long. It basically gave them a basic tracking piece in the beginning, and gave them a little bit more of an advanced skill in the second week. And it was really meant for like infantry folks, maybe Cav scouts, things of that nature, guys who are going to be on the ground, who maybe get IED'd or ambushed by the enemy, and then basically turn it into a movement to contact to basically pursue them in order to make contact with them, and either kill them, capture them, or whatever. But basically, relentless pursuit was pretty much the idea. Okay. Did it work out that way? No, it didn't. But I mean, there was another program, the WIT program, which was a weapons intelligence team program, and that was more of a forensics thing, where they would process an IED site, gather forensic data, whether it be from the footprints of what was left on the ground, blood evidence. It could be pieces of the bomb itself, the IED itself. They had a wide range of guys that were in those teams, from EOD technicians to photographers and whatever. They even had their own medics and stuff like that. But the one thing that we were trying to do was to basically have the combat tracking team and the WIT teams working together, right? So as the WIT team basically processes a site, right, they could basically do a 360 search around the outside of it, figure out the entry points and exit points into that area that they're processing, and then the combat tracking team could get on the track line and then basically run the enemy down before they got too far ahead. That was the whole idea. It didn't work out that way, though. I mean, nobody wanted to pay for the program, even though the program was a great program. Everybody admitted it was a great program. But with Iraq kind of slowing down, the money, I think everybody was just kind of like guarding their money, and they didn't want to put it into the program. So,
which is kind of in contrast, because when we talk about the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq, there was a lot of money thrown around. Let's say when it just first began. I mean, the coffers were open and money was just spewing out.
Yep. But they bought a lot of gadgets.
Absolutely. They bought a lot of gadgets. But here we go back to that question that I asked you about in the beginning, where you see that we don't have those tracking teams that we had in Vietnam, those guys on the ground. Right. And it almost seems like when it comes to, once again, getting new technology or developing a human that can do something exponentially better at a certain point, we go away from it again. Now, there was some kind of number, like I wrote it down in here. I got to find it. That IEDs were like 50%. It says IEDs were responsible for almost 50% of the casualties, both mortal and injured, in Iraq, and 30% in Afghanistan. Now, that's a big thing. An interesting point that you brought up to me, though, about the IED was that it's just a booby trap. That's all it is.
It's just a booby trap.
And we've had booby traps since World War I.
Yeah.
I mean, and you could probably go back even further than that.
Go back further than that, man.
But
look, here's the thing. This is what I noticed. So when I was in the service, right, when I was a young private, we had what was the SQT, skill qualification test, right? I don't know if you had that when I think your time was Hawaii your first duty station?
Yeah.
Okay, it might have been on its way out. because it was around that time that they got rid of it. But I mean, it was just, they skill level 1 tasks for
It
your
was like a
MOS.
12 station course, right?
Well, it wasn't like CTT training; it was a written exam.
Oh, okay. No. I never did that then. No.
Okay, so yeah, they and like one of the skills, like all when I was a private, all the way up until I was an NCO, was locate mines and booby traps by visual means. Okay, now how did we go from that to not being able to do it in wartime, right? And maybe that's because we got rid of the SQT. No one would read that, their SQT manual, because they weren't being tested on it no more. So maybe they got it in, basic training or whatever, and then that was the end of it, you know. Um, but I, you all the things that we would look for IEDs was the same stuff we would look for, in the SQT as far as uh, indicators of a booby trap,
Well,
wires,
I,
you
I
know.
guess I guess the question that I have for you then, when we talk about that, when you say IED is just a booby trap, we go
Yeah,
back to the where we're going to fund people that can do this. Don't you think the whole point of that course and to train these people was IEDs, of course, were very bad. They were decimating people
yeah,
out there. If we can treat or teach a group of people to hunt these bomb makers down faster or where they're
yeah,
going to,
yeah,
won't that force multiply us like
yeah.
exponentially?
Yeah, you would think, right?
Right.
Yeah. Or even if you hit an objective and you had squirters out of the village, right? You could have guys, pursue those squirters. I mean, there's so many applications for this. But here's the thing, right? They started using canines, so they thought canines were going to basically do all these things that a human could do, right? Well, here's the thing: a dog has a great sense of smell. There's no doubt they got a better sense of smell than we do, right?
Okay.
But here's the thing: a dog can't look at the ground and tell you what the marks on the ground mean, right? They can't interpret those marks.
Okay.
They can't tell you how many people you're following, okay? In some cases, the dog is just like a human being. They get tired, they get hungry, they get thirsty. They don't want to do what you ask them to do. You know what I'm saying? So at least the handler should be a tracker, tracker qualified to where he can see and validate whether his dog is on the scent or not, just by the marks on the ground.
I
You
guess
would
the
think.
right. So I guess the big question would be, why is this not important?
I guess it's not sexy enough. I don't know. I mean,
I mean,
I
that's
get,
pretty sexy though, tracking down people that are making bombs quickly and being
yeah,
able to hunt a
but
person is that's pretty sexy.
yeah, but think about it like this: a
Okay.
commander doesn't. Commanders, right? Who are the decision makers on spending the money, right? They're looking at all the things that they have that need to be get done during that year as far as training, right? And then they look at all the other things that they want to do with that money. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of times the soldiers lose out, man. They lose out. I mean, it's just look, it happens with law enforcement too. I get law enforcement guys that come to my class and they complain because they're like, hey, this is a really good skill, even for forensics. You know, even
Right.
just to use this, as a way of processing forensics, and then getting an idea where the criminal left off to, or whatever. But guys, I don't know if there was some, at some point, guys kind of looked at that tracking skill kind of like hooey. You know what I'm saying? Like the Indian who said, hey, Kimosabi, one blind man came through here with a crutch or whatever, and that's not how it works. It doesn't work that way. You know, it's physical. It's physical things that you can see, physical marks that you can see. And so it's kind of like reading a book, right? So you start at the beginning of the book, which is where you first initially start processing the site. And then as you continue tracking that person, you're seeing little bits of more information that you're all putting together. So now, it's like you have a couple of sentences, then you have a paragraph, and that paragraph is telling you something, you know. And if you're paying attention and you're looking at your map and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, where's potentially this guy going to? Because humans are freaking lazy. They're lazy and they're going to take the path of least resistance to go anywhere. So you can pretty much figure out where this guy is going potentially, and you can even jump a team further up to cut for sign so that you can break that time distance gap between you and your subject. So you can actually make it quicker, and pursue them quicker.
Well, this kind of leads right into our second topic. I want to talk about your combat tracking guide, the book that you wrote. And I want to go over, first off, the 7 basic tracking principles. Positive idea of tracks that you're going to follow. So let's break these down by pieces. So positive idea tracks that you're going to follow. I want to bring this up because this is what you talked about, a dog versus a human. Dogs are very good at tracking, but the human can differentiate, okay, this is definitely what I want to go after, not just a scent or not just whatever it is that they're going to follow on. So let's talk about the positive idea of tracks.
Yeah, so I mean, look, so what brought you to that place in the first place? What brought you to that incident site, right? Was there a firefight? Were you in an ambush? Was somebody else in an ambush? Did somebody spot somebody, who was armed or something like that and report it? And now you're going out there to investigate it? So, I mean, those are the things that we're all kind of putting together. We also need to know, hey, what's the footwear that we're wearing? Because you don't want to go in there and contaminate everything, and you don't want everybody muddling around. Or is it another, a unit that's there who have muddled around? I've gone to plenty of places where I've worked with police where a guy goes missing, he abandons the vehicle, and the first guys there start just mucking around the whole area. Now you can't, they've contaminated everything, and now I get there and I'm looking at the prints, and I'm sitting there going, okay, well, now I got to figure out, who was here, what kind of footwear that they had, and then who's the subject. And so I got to differentiate all those guys, based upon, those guys muddling around, where the guy left the car, so I can figure out where he went.
So is there a way to defeat that then? Of course, education and things like that. But when you get there and you see,
sift through all that contamination,
but once again, that slows down the reaction time.
Yeah, but I mean, if you got guys who are on it and they train with, whoever's out there, whether it be law enforcement or military, and they know that, hey, we have this capability. And so if something happens, we're going to hold tight. We're going to, basically isolate this area and not go into it. And we'll wait for whoever's going to come out there. Same thing goes with a dog, right? A dog, if you take a dog into a contaminated area, right? That dog is not it's going to take a while for it to get on the scent line.
Absolutely.
So it's really no different for a human being. The only thing is that the human being can basically try to look at, what's on the ground, and even going, doing concentric 360s out from that point, out from that contamination. Hopefully they can pick something up, and I typically do. I mean, if I can do it, I think anybody can do it.
So number 2, track line between you and your light source.
Yeah. So that way the shadow, right? The light, and you're basically utilizing the light and the shadow so that you can actually see the tracks that you're following. Same thing goes with, even bent down grass and things of that nature. Sun will reflect off that grass. So you want to kind of position yourself somewhere where you can actually see that. Now, here's the thing. That's a rule of thumb, but that doesn't always happen, especially if you're underneath canopy, because you don't have it. You know what I'm saying? So you just got to maneuver around the track line to figure out what the best vantage point is so that you can go on it. But
so say with law enforcement, a lot of times they're working at night when people bail on them. So there's not going to be really a light source, especially if they're dumping off into a wooded area. So How do
You
we
can use a
defeat
flash,
that?
you
Okay.
can use a flashlight, but here it depends on the threat, doesn't it? Because obviously, if there's somebody
Absolutely.
who's armed and dangerous, do you really want to give away your position with a flashlight?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Um,
But you
there
also
might be
don't want to
other.
fumble around in the dark either, because that's
Right.
just as
Exactly.
dangerous.
Exactly. Exactly. But what I'm saying is that maybe you're not going to be tracking that guy, you know, especially if you think that they're close by and they haven't gone very far. You know, if that guy isn't familiar with areas, let's just say, typical thing. I talk to cops with all the time. They pull a guy over, and then he ditches the car, runs into the frickin' wood line. But he's not from there, right? So typically they sit in there for a little bit, wait for the cops to leave, and then they'll come walking out, and then they'll, basically walk the road, maybe hitch a ride or something like that. But a lot of times, if you just push through there a little bit, you'll find them because they're not at home out there.
Right.
Most, you know,
Number 3, observe and track as far as sign can be recognized. So
right.
I think this is kind of going to tie into that second one that we just talked about.
So yeah, so as you're sitting there on the track line, one thing you're constantly scanning around your area, making sure that the track line doesn't basically veer off to the left or veer off to the right. You're looking to make sure there's no deception around you. Okay, uh, and as you're standing at the last known, where there's sign right there by your feet, and so you're tying in all the other pieces of sign out there to the furthest sign that you can see. If that's 5 feet, if it's 2 feet, if it's 20 feet, it doesn't matter. If you can tie it all in, right, from the furthest sign all the way to you, then you move on it. Does that make sense?
Well, let me ask you a question. Say you can tie it out to that 20 feet or whatever,
Yeah.
but at 12 feet you get a break. Is there?
Okay, but see, sometimes you won't see until you start walking it, and then you're confirming it.
Okay.
So it's kind of like what I tell people is like you're kind of scanning like this in a side by side method, going out and then coming back in.
Okay.
So you're getting everything out there, and then you're still confirming the track line as you're moving on it. Right?
Okay.
You're just not moving from the last known all the way to the furthest. Right? That doesn't make any sense because they could leave a false track and then go off somewhere different. So you've got to be able to basically confirm your whole route up there.
And that kind of leads into the next one. Never move further than the last determined sign.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Don't. Yeah. Don't. A lot of guys they get like the hound dog in them. They get and it's just like they start moving on it so fast that they pass something up, and then they lose it. So you don't go any further than the last known.
okay.
That's it.
Never contaminate the sign.
Yeah. Never walk on it. Don't walk on top of it if you can. It all depends though. I mean, just like if you're out in a dusty environment, right, or a dirt environment where you actually see physical footprints,
Right.
and in that dirt, you're not going to walk on top of them. That's evidence, right?
Right.
But obviously, if you get out in the wood line and there's a blaze going through tall grass, well, get in the blaze. Because if you start walking off to the left or right of it, now you're contaminating that as well. And now, if you have to come back through there, which trail did the subject go on, and which one did you make?
Well, and I would think too, if you get off to the left and right of it, you're not going to see if there's a break in that because you're not going to be in the middle of it.
The other thing is putting yourself in his shoes, seeing the terrain from his vantage point. And if you can sit there and put yourself in his position, right, and look at the terrain as he's looking at it, and even when he stops, where he stops next to a tree, hey, sit down by that tree. What was he looking at? What was he doing?
But that, to me, that sounds a little more than basic to know he stopped at that tree. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm talking at the most basic level. What what are guys looking for that? Even the most basic guys to know, like, okay,
Well,
something's
look,
not
you're gonna
right
see,
here.
okay, so you might see, heel digs
Okay.
in the ground. You might see partial impressions inside inside the track traps, the dirt. Okay. You might see flattening of the grass. You might see broken limbs, broken branches, rocks tipped out of its position, leaves that are turned over so that the wet portion or the dark portion of the leaves are facing up towards the sun. You could see, broad leafy plants where uh, the light coloredness of the underbelly is now flipped up, okay, and now it's facing you rather than in its original
Right.
position, okay. There's, I mean, broken cobwebs, you know, broken cobwebs between bushes or other types of vegetation. I mean, it could be a host of things,
Right.
you know. So, and for a guy who takes a break and stops, he's meandering there a little bit. You know, he may sit down. He may sit down in the shade on a sunny day, right? But by the time you get up there, that that shade is already shifted. So it could even tell you what time he was there.
Right.
Okay, it can, and then by sitting there in his position and looking, what was he looking at? What was he doing? Was he looking at you? Was he looking at you coming through a valley if he's up on high ground?
I think the next one is kind of the biggest one that throws everyone, and never track faster than your ability. I think,
Yeah,
like you said, that hound dog comes out and
yeah,
they shoot to the target
yep,
and end up being offline.
yep. That's exactly what happens. They get overly confident and they go faster than, because it's like they smell the blood, man. They smell the blood and they just get on that track line and they move quick. And you see that a lot with beginners because they start to get a little overconfident, because they're seeing things and it's
Right.
coming to them quickly. But you know, then they'll wind up they'll overshoot it, and then they'll lose it. Then they'll be in lost track drills for at least 20, 30 minutes. Maybe they don't pick it back up. I mean, so yeah, just everything's got to be controlled. You've got to realize. And the other thing is if they're moving too fast, depending on the situation, you might wind yourself, getting shot yourself.
Right.
A lot of times when I do this training, I set up in an ambush, or either that or I set up booby traps to purposely lure them into a spot to get them to calm down and to basically look at what they're doing, you know. And usually they're going too fast. They're going too fast, or they're not paying attention to the terrain, and they're not exploiting the terrain to their own benefit either. So, you know,
I I think the last one of it, I think goes back into your intelligence history and all that, getting into the mind of your quarry.
yep.
A couple questions that I have on that. One, do you think that a lot of people have trouble getting into the mind of their quarry? And number two, what are things that someone can do if they're having trouble processing that, looking at it, thinking like their quarry, that they can do to where every time they get into that situation, it almost becomes second nature?
You know what? What I tell students all the time. What would you do if you were this guy? What would you be doing? Where would you go? And most times they'll say, well, I would have gone right around this way, around this tree or around this rock or whatever. I was like, okay, well, go check it out. Sure enough, they'll go out. They'll find sign that takes them down that way, and then that's really it. You're basically putting yourself in his position and ask yourself, what would you do? I mean, if you're, don't you do that with criminals?
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be like, if I was him, what would I be doing? And as you're gathering information on him, right, you're getting more of a picture into, the habits of this guy or guys. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? It could be a
But I
bunch of
think I think you would agree, whether we're talking law enforcement, whether we're talking military, when you're asking someone to think like that,
yeah,
it's hard for a lot of people to process that, because in their brain it's telling them over and over, I'm a soldier, I'm this, I'm
yeah,
law enforcement, I'm not that, I'm not. And you see that you probably saw it a lot when you embed with indigenous groups and things like that. You have to start thinking like them. But a lot of
Yeah.
people, that mental block comes up and they don't know how to switch gears and go, okay, I'm not this person anymore. I'm now
Yeah.
this person.
I guess, you know, I guess, I guess for me, I really I don't really have that problem in my classes because most guys, I mean, I do one-on-one with them when they're tracking somebody.
Right.
And so, I'm looking at where are they looking, how are they moving on the track line? What, does he feel confident that, I look at his mannerisms too, and trying to figure out, does he feel confident? Does he not feel confident? Is he hesitant? Um, and I do a lot of communicating with him, I'm like, so what do you see? What do and they basically tell me all the things that they're seeing along the way. And then when I come up to something, I'll ask them, hey, well, what do you think that means? If you were him, what would that mean? If he did something like this, what would that mean?
So you
What would
almost
that mean?
push them into that then.
Yeah, you have to get them. Yeah, they don't know. They don't know. So that's part of it. Being an instructor is to make them see the things that you're seeing. And look, here's the thing too. I mean, it's all a hypothesis. You don't know until you get to the end of the track line and you actually debrief the guy who laid it. You know, during when we're training. And look, sometimes look, I've been doing this for a long time, but I'm not always 100% right either. I might be 75%. But I mean, if you're 75%, you're doing pretty doggone good for
Yeah.
someone who didn't see what actually happened. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I always consider I consider if you get 70% of it right, you're doing pretty doggone good. If you get 100% of it, hey, you were lucky. You were lucky.
Yeah, I think you have a future in palm reading.
But I'll tell you, guys, I've had a guy. I had one guy who came to our class who he was colorblind, and that was a challenge. That was a challenge for me because he would get the brownish rust colored pine needles mixed up with what green grass. He couldn't tell the difference between the texture of both of those looking at it. You know, and of course I'm not colorblind, so I mean that's hard. That's hard to figure out. Okay, well, what does this look? You're constantly asking him, what does these pine needles look like? And he goes, well, it looks like grass to me. It all looks the same. But I mean, eventually we figured it, a way for him to kind of look at it and differentiate between grass and the pine straw. But it that took about 30, 40 minutes just trying to go back and forth, trying to figure out, how he perceived things, how he saw it, because, you know, he was handicapped in a sense, and we didn't know it until, he basically told us. He didn't tell us in the beginning of the course. We found it out on the track line because I was thinking like, how can he not see this? you know?
Right.
And then he was like, well, I'm colorblind. I was like, well, damn, okay, I should have, that would have been a nice thing to know, in the beginning. But I mean, he didn't track as fast as the other guys by the end of the class, but he did pretty doggone good.
Well, and in talking about that, you say using your senses. That's a big thing with you. Detect, follow, interpret, anticipate,
Yep.
locate. So when you have a guy like that definitely is handicapped against what you're doing. I mean, in the most basic definition of it, because
Yep.
he's not going to be able to differentiate colors, which you've talked about so many times in tracking something. Do those other senses help out? Does it become so much of a hindrance that we're probably not going to want to put that guy on it? Or is there a way to overcome that?
Look, I'll be honest. That guy, I mean, I know he wanted to do well, and he did okay, you know. But would I put that guy out there, you know, and have everybody depend on it? No, because you got to have good eyesight. You know, you got to look. You're using all your senses. You know, your sense of touch, your smell, you know, your hearing, your vision. You're using all those things. You know, I mean, literally, you are a predator. When you're out there, you're hunting. You're hunting somebody else who could be turn around and turn into hunting you. You know, it's a deadly game. You know, but it's exhilarating. Like when you get on that hunt and you know it's for real, let me tell you, the high is like nothing you've never felt. You know, that adrenaline's pumping hard, and
Absolutely.
especially if you, especially you find them, you know, then it's even better.
Let me ask you, what's the next evolution in tracking? We've talked about technology. We've talked about going back to the basics. Is there another evolution that's going to come? Do you see happening?
I don't, you know, I look. I mean, we all they already use, you know, some. I mean, guys have they use aircraft. They use, you know, drones to help. You know,
Right. And so
yeah,
that's my question. Do you see there that it could evolve even more?
I'm sure it could. I mean, you know, well, here, but see, here's the thing. I mean, you know,
Because I think you get further and further, the more it evolves, the more you get
I
away
don't
from
think it's
those
going to
basics.
gain a whole lot, though. You know, I
Okay.
mean, look, even for Huachuca, they were because you know they had the drone program there, and they were talking about
Absolutely.
utilizing the drones and all this other stuff. Well, hey, the drones only got so much airtime.
Right.
It can't interpret anything on the ground. You might be able to detect movement in somebody running off,
You
but here's the
and
thing:
heat and all those kind of things.
yeah, if you've got somebody who's conducting a pursuit, you know, and those guys, you know, who are fleeing know that they're being pursued, they're gonna push themselves harder, you know,
Absolutely.
and that whole fight or flight thing, either they're gonna run, hide, they're gonna try to lose you, or they're gonna get, you know, you're gonna make up so much distance that they're gonna try to, you know, basically duke it out with you, you
I
know,
was always told, they're running for their lives. You're running after
yeah,
them. They're running for their lives. So
right,
it's on a whole nother level for them.
yeah, yeah, but see, you know, if you can most people when they're being chased their heart levels goes up, you know, and if they can't keep themselves calm and they can't observe the terrain around them, they're just gonna book, man. They're gonna book, and they're, you know, they're just gonna try to put time and space between you and them, you know. But if you get a guy who thinks clearly and he thinks he can, you know, he can exploit the terrain to his advantage and give you a bloody nose to slow you down, you know, yeah, that can happen. But see, here's the thing, right? As a tracking team, they need to be looking at the terrain. They need to understand the terrain. Just to, you know, that's the biggest thing, understanding the terrain. Looking at the terrain and going, okay, where could I get hit? If I continue moving down this path, where could he possibly be? Or where could they possibly be? You know?
But once
And
again, you're
do I
going
want to,
back to the basics, maps.
yeah. And then do I want to stop here, right? Basically put an overwatch in and have
Right.
a maneuver element go through over there and clear that area before we continue moving, right? Or maybe I send somebody up, you know, get a helicopter overhead or something like that to try to flush them out.
Right.
Okay. Um, you know, and also when you lose a sign, and or when you're just trying when you're trying to make up time, look, sometimes you're going to jump track. You know, a lot of times if I see the track line and I see it's heading towards a road, a trail, something further up, a creek, or something like that, I'll mark that spot where I'm at and I'll jump forward to, you know, basically cut a line and try to pick them up where they're crossing that obstacle. And that's going to save me time.
Okay.
So I don't know if that makes sense or not,
No,
but
no, no. It makes sense to a certain extent. When you say that though, when you say the river, the road, the things like that, the first thing that comes into my mind is one, if you're following a track line and you've got footprints or turned over grass or
mm-hmm.
whatever,
Yeah,
you're coming to an area, that creek, that road, where
yeah,
it's going to be completely different. I mean,
Yep.
especially with like a creek, they could do a multitude of things to throw you off in the creek. They could.
You, it's
I'm
not as easy as you think, man.
okay. All right. Hey, you're the expert here.
Well, put it this way. It for guys who know what kind of counter tracking, techniques there are, what people might do, it shouldn't surprise you.
Okay.
You know,
Well, that
but
moves us
yeah,
in.
but if you've never seen it before and you're not thinking about it,
Right.
and you're just looking and you're just following footsteps, yeah, you can get thrown off.
Well, that
But
moves
remember,
us.
you have to look at it and look. There's times now where it's like I come across a log, and all of a sudden, things just don't look right. I look on that log, man. See if he jumped on that log, and see if he broke any of the doggone bark on that log to try to fool me. And sure enough, man, every single time, you pick him up. And of course, if there's any vegetation going over that log, he's got to step around it or step on it or whatever. And so he's making more sign as soon as he gets on there. He thinks he's covering his tracks. He thinks he's being slick. But if you understand the technique and what they're going to use, you're going to look for opportunities where they potentially could do something like that, and you're going to look at it and basically, look at and scrutinize it, see whether or not they did use it as a counter tracking technique. Going in the water, they got to come out.
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
what if they come out 100 yards down? Are you
Yeah.
just scanning the shoreline? Or you?
Yeah, you're doing a streamlined search. You're going up or down, until you find something.
Okay.
And the thing is where's the stream flowing? Did he enter at the wrong spot? And then all of a sudden I'm getting soot. I can see soot in the stream, or did he take the time and figure out, and move downstream as the stream's, flowing away? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than going up it. So I mean, yeah. And then eventually, like I said, he's going to have to get out. He's going to have to look for a good position to get out. And here's the thing about counter tracking. You're not, most guys who do, they use one technique. If you're going to be effective, you have to use multiple techniques in order to throw somebody off.
That takes us into our final topic, and that is this company that you have and all the different things that you teach people. TYR Group LLC. Now, you have classes on tactical tracking, counter tracking, small unit tactics, survival, man tracking, land navigation, survival prep, military combat tracking and counter tracking course, rural pursuit and tactical medical course. You have so many different things that you teach. The thing that I want to get across to people is that you not only do this for the military, but I think that civilians can get something from this.
Yeah.
Whether that be survival, medicine, if they're lost in the woods, whatever. You hear every year about hikers getting lost in the woods or climbers getting lost in the woods. These are things that they can learn. Now, the motto that I saw from you guys is computer and electronics break, batteries fail, but the human computer, your brain, will always prevail.
Yeah.
Now, I like that you made it rhyme and everything. I do like that.
That was my intent.
But you're exactly right. And we've talked about that this whole conversation, that technology at some point will fail you. You control whether you fail yourself or whether your brain fails you. So let's talk about a couple of the courses that I really found kind of interesting. Let's talk about the man tracking course, because when I saw that, it's a basic visual man tracking skills to identify, interpret, and follow evidence. It's pretty much what we've been talking about the whole night.
Yep.
And so
it's a short course. It's for guys that, like hunters, outdoor enthusiasts, guys who just like the outdoors, but let's, just like you brought up, hikers go, they get lost, right? Well, if you can track, you can backtrack yourself out of that area. If you can, you know what I'm saying?
right. You can follow that breadcrumb
trying to
trail.
locate game, that's another way of locating game. So I mean, it's just, and for some people, it may just be, like, I don't know if I'm really going to get into this, but I'm going to try it out. It might be kind of fun. So, but sometimes you get most people go through the class and they're kind of like, hey, that was fun. But then, a smaller percentage of the guys that come through get the fever and like they will never look at anything the same way again.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, like, I was one of those guys. So, anytime I find an opportunity, you know, I use the skill, you know, I even used it when my kids were growing up, whether they took out the garbage or not, or, they had friends coming to the window at night or whatever. Yeah, it was, they knew they couldn't get one by on me. So,
The counter tracking course.
yeah.
It's hands-on tactical evasion experience to individuals and teams in a short period.
Yep.
And this is what we talked about a little bit right there. If you've got someone that's experienced in counter tracking, can we talk
Yeah,
a little bit about that and how it's going to differentiate against the man tracking course?
well, yeah. So there, you're an evader.
Okay.
You're an evader. So we talk. They get a little bit of understanding as far as does what are the capabilities of uh, a visual tracker. What capabilities does a canine bring to it? The levels of different training, how they perceive their environment compared to who's an invader, right? And so the big thing so if you understand what the tracker is going to do or what a canine is going to do, you're going to know how to basically counter that, right? And utilizing a lot of different techniques, and then a lot of it's all hands on. They practice it, and usually I'll track them, or me and a couple other guys will track them, to see whether or not they're effective or not. We get a lot of Air Force Air guys that go through that, you know.
I gotta ask though, because this class seems to be where I think you would get the most comic relief. Worst story of counter tracking.
Oh, you know what's funny? So in SEER, uh, you're always taught to go ugly early when it comes to eating things, right? So just like eat the nastiest bugs first. You know what I'm saying? Just go ugly, eat the
Okay.
bugs, and so for counter tracking, it's the same thing. You know, you go ugly early. So just realize you're going to be uncomfortable. And 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 do those uncomfortable things. Guys, they're afraid to get their feet wet, jump into a stream or whatever. And it's like, dude, if your life is really, you know, on the line, you need to take this stuff seriously and get in there and go ugly early. You know, start looking at the terrain and start exploiting it to your advantage.
What's the worst one you've had come through? No names or anything, but what's the worst one that you've had come through?
Worst class or
No. Just maybe the worst experience where the person just is not where you're saying, you got to do this, you got to get into this, and they're just fighting
well,
it
look,
tooth
man.
and nail.
You know, to be honest, I haven't really. I guess I deal with people a little. I don't really get upset.
Okay.
Yeah, like I understand that one. I can tell who's really into it and who's gonna, who's gonna perform, and then somebody who's just there for maybe a certificate, or whatever. And so, obviously the guys who are really putting forth the effort, I'm going to put forth the effort. I'm going to really, provide them the best training I can. Now that guy who's, you know, finger drilling it, well, okay, I'll give him an opportunity to, to jump in there and correct himself, but I'm not going
Right.
to sit there. I'm not going to invest. I'm not going to invest my time in somebody who's not invested in themselves. So, I don't really let it bother me. And I've had guys like that. I've had guys that come through and it's like, you try to help them out and they don't want to listen and they want to do what they're going to do. And you're like, hey, you can do this, and then they start doing the opposite and you go, or not, and you just let them go, let them make their own mistakes,
Right.
And that's just how I deal with it.
Right. Rural pursuit, collaboration between one of your affiliations, which is TYR Group and Lone Star Medics.
Yeah. Caleb Causey, he does like he'll do a day medical portion. We'll start that off just in case somebody gets hurt while we're out there. He does trauma medicine, basic trauma medicine and stuff like that. But he also we go over, heat injuries, cuts and boo-boos and stuff like that. But, a lot of the time is, gunshot wounds, stuff like that. And then the rest of it's just it's a tracking. It's basically the 4 days of the tracking class. But that rural pursuit is really geared towards law enforcement. That's who we designed it for, because they the ROEs are different from somebody who's doing it, combat tracking.
Right.
And so and really what started that off, to be honest with you, was the Eric Frein incident in Pennsylvania, the manhunt for Eric Frein.
Okay.
That lasted 46 days, I believe, a couple of years ago, where he killed the state cop.
Okay.
And so that's where that kind of started, to get some of the law enforcement community. We even, we changed it from tactical tracking to, rural pursuit, and hoping that somebody would latch onto this and see the benefit of it. Because we talk about working with canines and stuff in that class too. So, in case you get a canine that's attached to you, how do you move in a formation? How do you, search for sign? How do you work together as a team? It's a tactical environment. So, it's not just the individual tracking. It's everyone doing, the guys doing their flank security, the guys doing rear security, the guys who are controlling the element. If the dog team is there, where's the dog team located? And when do you bring them up? It's just, we go through all that stuff. What kind of support assets do you have? Do you have helicopters? Do you have other vehicles? Do you have other teams on the ground? How would you support those guys if you were on there for, 24 hours and you still need to get water and food and stuff like that out to them? So all that goes into the planning, for rural pursuit. It's not just tracking. It's the whole operation itself,
And so that could be from the actual officer on the street all the way up to the command staff.
Sure. Yeah, we get guys that come through, and like one of the big organizations that comes through every couple of years is Hillsborough Sheriff's Department.
Okay.
Down in Florida. Those guys, and they send me some pretty cool pictures of stuff they do, and they're using it. It's good. It's good. And then I've had some guys up in Ohio, that we had basically a task force that came through. It was several sheriff's departments that kind of pull resources, and they had canine handlers, they had drone pilots, they had just the regular SWAT team guys that basically were all out there doing this tracking thing. And then we talked about how they could all roll this up into operations, and then we actually did that, where we had a command cell and everything else. So
survival and preparedness. Now, I think this one of all your classes is the most overall class. I would think that the most people could take advantage of. Just from, you see a lot
not
of
many do. Not many do.
Okay.
Most people come to believe it or not, most people come to the land navigation. I get more people wanting land navigation more than anything.
Okay. Well, so let's talk about that for a minute then, because to me, this seems like, if The Walking Dead ever happens, this is what we're going to want. You're going to want to be able to survive. So why do you think so many people, because land nav is of course important, but
Yeah.
surviving and actually being able to live so you can perform land nav, I
Yeah.
think would be higher on the scale.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what. I think land navigation is probably the base. That's the base class you want to take for anything outdoors, because if you can learn, if and it's not just map reading, right? It's terrain appreciation. Understanding, where your water sources are going to be, what's good, where you're going to basically have thicker vegetation where it's going to be slow moving through there, but you want to, or where you're going to get shade, and stay out of the sun, or you know, um, you know, where can you find, the most likely place you're going to find animals that you can hunt, you know, um, if you're tracking, where are you going to find, where are you going to most likely find footsteps, signs of passage through an area, if it's a tactical environment too, where would the enemy most likely be, where would they hide, where would they, you know, where would they go, to conceal their movements. I mean, and of course, if you're trying to, you know, be rescued, you know, you want to know how to exploit terrain, use minimal amount of energy to get to a place where you can be rescued. So, you know, it, most guys when they come through the land nav, uh, they're they're kind of like doing the whole dead reckoning thing, where it's like, 200, 1,000 meters, on a 36-degree azimuth, and not breaking it up, and we teach them how to take shorter legs, stay on azimuth a little bit better, and then, uh, you know, create those intermediate objectives along the way so that they know where they're at during their whole trip. Um, but land nav, a lot of people have fun at it, man. They like it. But that seems to be that's the one class that, like, I get a lot of people that come out for that. You know, the tracking classes are the next one, and then small unit tactics. That's another one that gets a lot of people. Um, to be honest, the survival stuff. Most of the guys that come to the classes already have taken like some kind of survival class, and they're kind of like that anyway. They're hunters, they're outdoor enthusiasts. You know, they either have taken some survival classes or they've just grown up doing it, you know. So,
I want to talk about one of your other affiliations. We already talked about Lone Star Medics. Let's talk about Spartan Training Concepts.
oh yeah, yeah.
If you can tell us a little bit about them and just what they give to your courses.
Well, really, they host me out
Okay.
up in Oregon. Yeah, I mean they're just, they're a host, but Josh Long, he's I'm kind of grooming him to be my assistant instructor and stuff like that. He's really got, I mean, really smart guy, man. Doesn't have a military background or a law enforcement background, but he's an outdoorsman through and through. He's a hunter, and he's just got the dude. He's got the mentality for all this stuff, all of it. He's a real smart guy.
Well, guys, any of the courses that you want to take, you can reserve your classes at tyrgroupllc.com. That's TYRGROUPLLC.com. You can also contact them by phone at 337 344 7928. Your book is also available on the Kindle store, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Google Play Books, Scribed, and Amazon Prime. You can find it there. Is there anything else before we end this that you'd like to promote that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we started doing some classes on basically irregular warfare
Okay.
to get people really kind of thinking about that, especially in this, in this environment that we have politically in this country right now. And it's not necessarily for them really to conduct it, more or less to detect what's going on inside their area. So, to be able to detect potential troublemakers coming in and destabilizing your area. We've done that out in a couple of communities now. Virginia, there's a community out there. I'm not going to tell you where, because they're doing some great things, but I want to kind of keep it, for their own protection. They're doing some good things, but it's more community based, working with church groups and stuff like that. That's who've really been, because they don't want their towns burned down.
I think that I think a lot of people feel that way. Other than that, anything else?
No.
Okay.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you, asking me to come on here and I'm getting to talk to you about all these different subjects. I really had a good time.
Yeah. No, I'm very happy.
I definitely could go on further.
Like I said, I'm so happy that you came on here. I think that this is something with, like you said, with the current climate, I think more people are starting to look into that, taking kind of care of themselves, being able to be self-sufficient for their families and stuff. And there's a lot of stuff that you teach that can teach them those things. One more time, guys, if you want to reserve classes, you can reserve it at tyrgroupllc.com, TYR LLC.com. You can contact them by phone at 337-344-7928. You can get his book at the Kindle store, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Google Play Books, Scribed, and Amazon Prime. Also, I want you guys to go check out Black Point Tactical. They have sent us over here at the studio some holsters. They make some great stuff out there. Go check them out. I think that's going to be it for tonight. I think we've just about covered everything that we can tonight. If you want more of me, you can find me on Twitter at DoublespeakDJ. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD Podcast, and you can find me on YouTube at the DTD Podcast. Remember, guys, you come here every week because the best stories are true. That's John. I'm DJ. That's been the show. We'll catch you on the next one. We'll see you later, guys. Bye.